Being a nice human starts inside. Most people think being a nice human is something that shows up in public. It is how you speak to others, how patient you are in line, how often you smile. That version is real, but it is not the beginning. The beginning happens much earlier, usually when no one is watching. It happens in the quiet moments, when you make a mistake and notice the tone of your own thoughts, when you feel tired and decide whether to push yourself harder or let yourself rest. When something small goes wrong and your mind rushes in to explain what it means about you, that inner voice sets the mood for everything else. Many of us learned how to be kind outwardly before we ever learned how to be kind inwardly. We were taught manners, empathy, and patience. We were taught to apologize quickly. We were taught to be understanding. What we were not taught was how to speak to ourselves when we fall short of our own expectations. So we became people who offer grace to everyone else, while running a very strict operation inside our own heads. You might recognize this pattern. You mess something up, you forget something, you say the wrong thing. The response is immediate, harsh, efficient, a kind of mental slap on the wrist that says, do better next time, try harder. Why are you like this? It feels productive at first. It feels like accountability, but over time it becomes exhausting. Being a nice human does not mean never holding yourself responsible. It means how you do it. There is a difference between reflection and punishment. One helps you learn, the other just wears you down. If you listen closely, you might notice that your inner voice often speaks in absolutes. Always. Never. Everyone else manages this. You should know better by now. These phrases sound familiar because they are easy shortcuts for the mind. They create a quick story and move on. But they are rarely true. Most days are more complicated than that. Most people are doing the best they can with the energy, knowledge, and emotional bandwidth they have in that moment. That includes you. Kindness toward yourself does not mean pretending everything is fine. It means allowing room for reality. Reality includes effort and limits existing at the same time. Sometimes being a nice human inside means pausing before reacting to your own thoughts, not arguing with them, not trying to fix them, just noticing them. That pause creates space. And space is where gentler responses begin. You might notice how quickly your mind jumps to conclusions about your worth, about your future, about what this one moment supposedly proves. That speed can feel impressive, but it is not always helpful. Slowing that process down is an act of kindness. You can ask quieter questions instead. What actually happened? What part of this is within my control? What part of this needs rest instead of effort? These questions do not demand perfection. They invite understanding. Being nice to yourself also involves letting go of the idea that you must earn rest, compassion, or care. Many people operate on an internal rule system that says kindness is conditional. You get it only after you perform well enough. That rule system is tiring, and it does not really work. If kindness only appears after success, then it disappears exactly when you need it most. During failure, during uncertainty, during change. A nicer approach is steadier. It says you deserve basic care even on your worst days, especially on your worst days. This does not make you lazy or complacent. It makes you sustainable. You may have noticed that when you treat yourself harshly, your motivation does not actually improve. It might spike briefly, driven by fear or guilt, but it rarely lasts. Eventually, the body pushes back, through exhaustion, through avoidance, through quiet resentment toward your own goals. Kindness works differently. It builds trust with yourself. When your mind knows it will not be attacked for being honest, it becomes more open, more cooperative, less defensive. That trust matters. Being a nice human on the inside also means acknowledging how much you carry, the responsibilities, the expectations, the emotional labor that rarely gets named. It is easy to overlook this because you are used to it, because you have always done it. But just because something is familiar does not mean it is light. You can recognize effort without turning it into a competition. You do not need to prove that you are struggling enough to deserve care. You do not need to compare your pain to anyone else's. Your experience is valid because it is yours. There is also a quiet bravery in choosing gentleness in a world that often rewards toughness. Many messages tell us that being hard on ourselves is a sign of discipline or strength, that softness is weakness, That pressure builds character, but pressure without relief breaks things. Gentleness does not mean giving up. It means choosing a tone that allows you to keep going without burning out. It means recognizing that growth happens more reliably in environments that feel safe. Your mind is no different. You might start small. Notice one moment a day where you interrupt a harsh thought. You do not have to replace it with positivity. Neutral is enough. Simply saying, "This is hard," can change the atmosphere. Over time, these small moments add up. The inner environment becomes less hostile, more livable. You begin to feel like you are on your own side instead of constantly being evaluated. That shift affects everything else: how you respond to others, how you handle stress, how you recover from mistakes. Being a nice human inside does not make you less accountable. It makes you more resilient. There will still be days when you snap at yourself out of habit. That is okay. Habits take time to change. Kindness includes patience with the learning process itself. You are not trying to become a different person. You are learning to relate to yourself differently. And that relationship matters. You live with yourself all the time. Every thought, every feeling, every quiet moment at the end of the day. Being a nice human starts there, not as a grand transformation, just as a gradual softening, a willingness to speak to yourself the way you would speak to someone you care about. Not perfectly, just honestly, and with a little more kindness than before. Kindness is a skill you can practice with yourself. Kindness often gets described as a personality trait. Some people are kind, others are not. It sounds fixed, like eye color or height, but when you look more closely, kindness behaves less like a trait and more like a skill. Something shaped by repetition, environment, and habit. That is especially true when the kindness is directed inward. Most people did not grow up practicing kindness with themselves. They learned how to push through, how to ignore discomfort, how to stay functional no matter what was happening inside. Those abilities can be useful, but they are not the same as kindness. In fact, they often develop as a way to survive environments where gentleness was not available. So when someone tries to be kinder to themselves later in life, it can feel awkward, unnatural, even unnecessary. The mind might react with suspicion. Why are we doing this? Shouldn't we be tougher? Won't this make us soft? That reaction is not a failure. It is simply the voice of an old training program. Skills always feel strange before they feel normal. Think about how any skill is learned. You do not wake up one day knowing how to play an instrument or speak a new language. You repeat small actions, you make mistakes, you improve slowly. Kindness works the same way, especially self-kindness. It begins with noticing. Notice the way you talk to yourself when things go well. Notice how quickly that tone changes when something goes wrong. The contrast can be surprising. Success often gets a brief nod. Failure gets a lecture. Practicing kindness does not mean eliminating that inner commentary. It means changing how you respond to it. Instead of letting it run unchecked, you gently intervene. You might catch yourself thinking, "I always mess this up." That is the moment where the skill comes in, not to argue, not to correct with forced positivity, just to soften. Maybe that becomes, "This didn't go how I wanted," or "I'm disappointed and that makes sense." These small shifts matter because they reduce the emotional intensity of the moment. They keep one event from turning into a full story about who you are. Kindness as a skill is built through repetition, not intensity. Grand gestures are not required. Consistency is. There is also a physical component to this practice that often goes unnoticed. When the mind feels attacked, the body tightens, shoulders lift, breath shortens. The nervous system prepares for danger, even if the danger is just a thought. When you speak to yourself more gently, the body responds. Muscles release slightly. Breathing slows. The system moves out of defense mode. This is not symbolic. It is physiological. Kindness changes how safe your body feels inside your own head. At first, this can be uncomfortable. Some people notice that when they stop pushing themselves harshly, emotions surface that were previously kept at bay. Fatigue, sadness, frustration. These feelings were always there. They just did not have permission to show up. Being kind does not mean indulging every feeling or letting life fall apart. It means acknowledging what is present without immediately trying to control it. That acknowledgement builds trust. Trust is an important part of practicing kindness. When you consistently meet yourself with understanding rather than judgment, your mind learns that it does not have to hide. It does not have to exaggerate or shut down to be heard. This is why kindness actually improves self-awareness. Harshness narrows attention. Kindness widens it. You may also notice resistance in the form of productivity anxiety, a fear that if you are too kind, you will stop striving, stop improving, stop caring. In practice, the opposite is often true. When kindness replaces fear as the primary motivator, effort becomes more sustainable. You still care, you still want to grow, but you are not constantly negotiating with exhaustion. Think of it like coaching. A coach who only criticizes eventually loses the team. A coach who offers guidance, encouragement, and honest feedback builds long-term performance. You are both the coach and the player in your own life. Practicing kindness also involves timing. Sometimes the kindest response is rest. Sometimes it is structure. Sometimes it is asking for help. Kindness is not one size fits all. It adapts to the moment. That adaptability is what makes it a skill rather than a rule. There will be days when you forget to practice, when stress takes over and the old voice returns. That is part of the process. Skills do not disappear because you miss a day. They strengthen over time, even with interruptions. You can think of kindness as a muscle that responds to gentle, regular use. Not strain, not punishment, just steady engagement. It also helps to notice where you already practice kindness naturally, perhaps with a friend who is struggling, or a child, or even a pet. The tone you use there is available to you too. It is not reserved for others. It is familiar. You already know how to do this. You are just redirecting it. As this skill develops, something subtle changes. You spend less energy fighting yourself. Decisions become clearer. Recovery from mistakes is faster. Not because you care less, but because you waste less time on self-attack. Life still presents challenges. Kindness does not remove them. It changes how heavy they feel to carry. Over time, you may notice that your inner world becomes a place you do not dread visiting. Thoughts come and go without constant interrogation. Feelings pass without being judged as good or bad. This does not mean constant calm. It means a baseline of respect. And that respect is learned, practiced, strengthened slowly. Kindness is not a reward for progress. It is the method. When you treat yourself with basic decency, you create conditions where growth can happen without fear, where effort feels possible again, where rest does not come with guilt. That is the quiet power of practicing kindness as a skill. It does not announce itself. It does not demand attention. It simply makes life more workable, one moment at a time. And like any skill, it gets better the more you use it. Why going to therapy is quietly brave. There is a certain image people carry of bravery. It is loud, visible, decisive. It looks like confidence without hesitation. It looks like someone who already knows what they are doing and does it anyway. Therapy does not fit that image very well. Therapy is quieter, slower, less impressive from the outside. Often it looks like sitting in a chair and talking about things you would rather avoid, or sitting in silence because you do not yet have words, or saying the same thing for the fifth time and realizing it still hurts. That does not look brave in the way movies teach us bravery should look. But it is. Choosing therapy is often not about fixing anything. It is about being willing to look. And looking honestly at your own inner life takes a particular kind of courage. Not the dramatic kind, the steady kind. Many people avoid therapy not because they do not need it, but because they are afraid of what might surface once they slow down enough to listen. Pain that was neatly packed away, grief that never had time to finish, anger that felt unsafe to express, confusion that was easier to ignore. Avoidance can look like strength for a long time. Staying busy, staying productive, staying functional. But eventually, the cost shows up. In the body. In relationships. In the quiet feeling that something is off, even when life looks fine from the outside. Therapy asks you to stop running for a moment. That pause can feel unsettling. When the noise fades, what remains can feel louder than expected. Thoughts you kept at arm's length move closer. Feelings demand attention. There is no performance, no checklist, no quick win. Just honesty. That honesty is where the bravery lives. Going to therapy also challenges a deep cultural habit of self-reliance. The idea that you should be able to handle things on your own. That asking for help is weakness. That struggling quietly is more respectable than admitting you need support. These ideas are powerful. They shape how people talk about mental health. They shape how people talk to themselves. Therapy quietly disagrees with that narrative. It says that being human includes needing help. That insight does not arrive fully formed on its own. That perspective is shaped through conversation, reflection, and sometimes guidance. This is not giving up control. It is expanding understanding. In therapy, progress is rarely linear. Some sessions feel clarifying, others feel confusing. Some leave you lighter, others leave you raw. There are moments when nothing seems to happen at all. This unpredictability can be frustrating for people who are used to measuring success by outcomes. Therapy resists that measurement. It works beneath the surface. Often, you only notice its impact later, in everyday moments. How you pause before reacting. How you recover faster from emotional setbacks. How certain patterns lose their grip. That slow change requires patience. It also requires trust. Trust in the process. Trust in yourself. Trust that sitting with discomfort now can prevent greater pain later. Bravery here is not about fearlessness. Most people enter therapy with fear. Fear of judgment, fear of being misunderstood, fear of discovering something they cannot fix. Bravery is showing up anyway. There is also bravery in naming experiences that were minimized or dismissed in the past, saying, "This mattered to me," even if others did not treat it that way. Acknowledging that something hurt, even if you were told it should not have. That kind of validation can feel strange at first, almost indulgent, but it is foundational. Without it, healing has nowhere to land. Therapy offers a space where your inner experience is taken seriously, not dramatized, not rushed, just acknowledged. That alone can be transformative. It is also worth noting that therapy is not about becoming a different person. It is not about erasing traits or emotions that feel inconvenient. It is about understanding yourself well enough to make choices that align with who you already are. Many people discover that what they thought were personal flaws are actually adaptive responses to earlier circumstances, strategies that once helped them survive but no longer serve them. Recognizing this brings relief. It reframes self-criticism into self-understanding. That shift is quiet but powerful. Therapy also teaches a different relationship with time. Problems are not always solved quickly. Some are understood gradually, some soften instead of disappearing. Some remain but become easier to carry. This is not failure. It is realism. Healing rarely looks like closure. It looks like integration. Choosing therapy is choosing to invest in that long view, to prioritize inner stability over outward appearance, to value depth over speed. That choice often happens privately. No applause, no announcement. Sometimes no one knows at all. But inside, something important is happening. You are signaling to yourself that your inner world matters, that your thoughts and feelings deserve attention, that you are worth the effort it takes to understand yourself better. That is quietly brave. There will be moments when therapy feels inconvenient, when it disrupts routines, when it brings up things you would rather leave alone. Those moments are not signs that you are doing it wrong. They are signs that you are touching something real. And there will be moments when you surprise yourself, when a familiar situation feels different, when you respond with more clarity or less reactivity, when you realize that a pattern that once controlled you now simply passes by. Those moments are not loud victories. They are internal shifts. Therapy does not turn life into something easy. It turns life into something more honest. And honesty, sustained over time, builds resilience. Going to therapy is not about being broken. It is about being attentive. It is about recognizing that mental and emotional health are not automatic. They require care, just like physical health. No one questions seeing a doctor for persistent pain. Therapy treats emotional pain with the same seriousness. Choosing that care is an act of self-respect. Quiet bravery rarely looks impressive. It looks like showing up consistently, like speaking when silence would be easier, like listening when distraction would be more comfortable. Therapy asks for that kind of bravery. And over time, that bravery becomes less about courage and more about habit. A habit of turning toward yourself instead of away. a habit of curiosity instead of judgment. That habit changes things. Not all at once, not dramatically, but steadily. And often, that is exactly what lasts. Growing positive thoughts without forcing them. Positive thinking has a reputation problem. It is often presented as something you should be able to switch on, like a light, like a decision. Just think better thoughts. Just look on the bright side. Just be grateful. For many people, this advice lands badly. It feels dismissive, out of touch, sometimes even insulting, especially when you are already doing your best just to get through the day. The truth is, positive thoughts do not respond well to pressure. They do not arrive on command. They cannot be bullied into existence. They grow, slowly, quietly, often when the conditions are right. Most minds are not naturally positive or negative. They are responsive. They react to experience, memory, stress, safety, and rest. When life feels overwhelming, the mind scans for threat. When life feels manageable, the mind has room to notice what is working. That is not a mindset problem. It is a nervous system doing its job. Trying to force positivity without addressing the underlying conditions is like asking a plant to grow without water or light. You can yell at it all day. Nothing changes. Growing positive thoughts begins with removing unnecessary resistance, not adding more effort. One common misunderstanding is that positive thoughts must replace negative ones, as if the goal is to evict doubt, fear, or sadness entirely. That expectation creates tension. The mind resists being controlled. The harder you push unwanted thoughts away, the louder they often become. A gentler approach allows thoughts to exist without granting them total authority. You might notice a discouraging thought appear. This is never going to work. Instead of arguing with it or trying to overwrite it with optimism, you let it pass through. You acknowledge it without endorsement. It is a thought, not a verdict. That distinction matters. When thoughts are treated as passing mental events rather than absolute truths, they lose some of their weight. They stop dominating the entire inner landscape. Positive thoughts tend to enter through that open space. They are often quieter than negative ones, less dramatic, more practical. They sound like, "This is hard, but I have handled hard things before." Or, "I do not know what happens next, but today is manageable." These are not slogans. They are observations. Growing positivity is less about convincing yourself that everything is good and more about noticing what is not entirely bad. That shift is subtle. It does not deny difficulty. It balances it. Many people expect positive thoughts to feel energizing or uplifting. Sometimes they do. Often they simply feel steady, neutral in a reassuring way, like solid ground. That steadiness is valuable. It helps to remember that the mind learns from repetition. If it spends most of its time rehearsing worries, regrets, or imagined futures, those pathways strengthen. This does not mean you are choosing negativity. It means your attention has been trained by circumstance. Changing that training takes patience. One way positivity grows is through familiarity. When you repeatedly acknowledge small moments of competence or relief, the mind begins to register them automatically, not because you forced it to, but because it learned they exist. This might look like noticing that you completed something you avoided, or that you rested without guilt for a few minutes, or that a conversation went better than expected. These moments are easy to overlook. They do not announce themselves. They do not demand attention. But when they are noticed, they accumulate. Another barrier to growing positive thoughts is the belief that they must be deserved, that you are not allowed to think well of yourself until you have earned it through achievement or improvement. This belief keeps positivity perpetually out of reach. In reality, positive thoughts often follow acceptance, not accomplishment. When you allow yourself to be human, including imperfect, learning, inconsistent, something softens. The inner tension eases. And with that easing, kinder interpretations become possible. You might notice that when you are rested, fed, and emotionally supported, positive thoughts appear more easily. That is not coincidence. It is biology. The brain is not separate from the body. Mental patterns are influenced by sleep, nutrition, movement, and stress levels. Expecting constant positivity while ignoring exhaustion is unrealistic. Growing positive thoughts sometimes starts with caring for basic needs, not as a productivity strategy, but as maintenance. There is also the influence of environment. the conversations you have, the media you consume, the pace of your days. These shape the tone of your thoughts more than most people realize. If your environment constantly signals urgency, comparison, or threat, positivity struggles to take root. Creating small pockets of calm can change that dynamic. Moments where the mind is not being pulled in 10 directions at once. Silence helps. So does routine. So does doing one thing at a time. Positive thoughts are more likely to appear when the mind is not overloaded. It is also important to allow negative thoughts to complete themselves. When feelings are cut off prematurely with forced optimism, they linger unresolved. They resurface later, often stronger. Letting a thought fully exist does not mean agreeing with it. It means listening long enough to understand what it needs. Sometimes it needs reassurance. Sometimes it needs rest. Sometimes it needs change. Once that need is addressed, the thought often releases its grip naturally. Positivity that grows this way feels believable. It does not ring hollow. It fits alongside reality instead of trying to replace it. Over time, you may notice that your default interpretations shift slightly. Not dramatically. You still have doubts. You still worry. But the balance changes. A setback becomes information instead of evidence of failure. A slow day becomes part of a larger rhythm instead of a personal flaw. Uncertainty becomes something you can live with rather than something you must eliminate. These shifts are not loud. They do not feel like breakthroughs. They feel like a quieter inner atmosphere. That atmosphere makes room for hope that does not feel naive, confidence that does not require denial, optimism that does not demand constant effort. Growing positive thoughts without forcing them is an act of trust. Trust that your mind knows how to move toward balance when it feels safe. Trust that you do not need to control every thought to be okay. You are not trying to become endlessly positive. You are allowing space for thoughts that support you instead of drain you. That space grows gradually, through attention, through patience, through kindness toward whatever shows up first. And often, without you realizing it, the thoughts you once had to work so hard to believe begin to arrive on their own. Healing is not a straight line, and that's fine. Healing is often imagined as progress with an arrow pointing forward, each step cleaner than the last, each day better than the one before. This image is comforting because it suggests clarity and control. It implies that effort leads predictably to improvement. Real healing rarely behaves that way. Instead, it moves in curves. It circles back, it pauses, it speeds up, then slows down. It sometimes looks like you are worse off than before, even when you are not. This can be confusing, especially for people who are trying hard to feel better. You might have a stretch of good days. You feel lighter, more capable. Then, without warning, old feelings return. Familiar patterns reappear. The same doubts you thought you had outgrown knock again. It is easy to interpret this as failure, but it is not. Healing is not a straight line because you are not a simple system. You are shaped by memory, emotion, biology, environment, and experience. Change within such a system does not follow a clean path. Sometimes what looks like going backward is actually deeper work happening beneath the surface. When you first begin healing, your system often responds with relief. There is a sense of movement, of hope, of things finally shifting. That phase can feel encouraging. It can also create expectations that this feeling should continue uninterrupted. When it does not, disappointment sets in. What is less visible is that early progress often brings awareness. As numbness fades, sensitivity increases. You begin to notice things you once ignored, boundaries you once crossed without realizing it, feelings you once suppressed. This awareness can feel uncomfortable. It can make it seem like things are getting worse. In reality, you are simply more present. Presence is not always pleasant. There are layers to healing. Addressing one layer often exposes another. You might resolve a surface-level issue only to uncover grief beneath it, or you might learn a coping strategy that works well until a more complex situation arises. This does not mean the earlier work was wasted. It means it created enough stability for deeper material to emerge. The mind prefers clean narratives. It wants to know where it stands. Healing resists that clarity. It asks for tolerance of uncertainty. That tolerance is a skill. On days when healing feels distant, the temptation is to evaluate everything, to replay decisions, to question whether you're doing it right. to compare yourself to imagined timelines. These evaluations rarely help. They add pressure to an already sensitive process. A more supportive approach is to view healing as movement rather than destination. Some days the movement is forward, some days it is sideways, some days it is inward. All of it counts. Setbacks often serve a purpose. They highlight areas that need more care. They reveal patterns that are not fully integrated yet. They remind you of what still matters. A setback is not the erasure of progress. It is part of how progress unfolds. There is also the reality that healing changes you. As you grow, your standards shift. What once felt acceptable no longer does. What once felt manageable now feels heavy. This can be mistaken for regression. In truth, it often means your awareness has sharpened. You are less willing to tolerate what harms you. That sensitivity is not weakness. It is information. Healing also interacts with life itself. Stressful events, loss, change, and uncertainty can temporarily overwhelm your coping resources. This does not undo your healing. It tests it. Even well-established skills can feel unavailable under enough strain. That does not mean they are gone. It means the system is under load. Restoring balance takes time. One of the hardest parts of nonlinear healing is learning not to panic during difficult phases, to resist the urge to label them as permanent. Emotions are persuasive. When you feel low, it can seem endless. Feelings, however, move. They rise and fall based on many factors, some of which you cannot control. Treating a temporary state as a final outcome creates unnecessary suffering. Patience is not passive in this context. It is active restraint. It is choosing not to make sweeping conclusions during moments of distress. There is also grief involved in healing, grief for time lost, for versions of yourself that survived without support, for opportunities that passed while you were struggling. This grief does not follow a straight line either. It comes and goes. It resurfaces unexpectedly. It coexists with relief and growth. Allowing this complexity is part of the work. Healing is not about erasing the past. It is about changing your relationship to it. That change happens gradually, through repetition and experience. Some lessons need to be learned more than once, not because you failed to learn them the first time, but because they need to be reinforced in different contexts. Each repetition deepens understanding. Over time, you may notice that the lows are less consuming, that recovery happens faster, that you recognize patterns earlier. These are signs of healing that do not always feel dramatic. They are easy to miss if you are only looking for constant improvement. Nonlinear healing requires self-trust. Trust that you can navigate fluctuations. Trust that you are not starting over every time something feels hard. Trust that progress includes pauses. This trust develops slowly, often through lived experience rather than reassurance. You survive hard days. You regain your footing. You learn that downturns are survivable. That learning accumulates. It is also important to remember that healing is not a race. There is no universal timeline, no benchmark you must meet. Comparing your process to someone else's is rarely useful. Context matters. Your pace is shaped by your history, resources, and current circumstances. Respecting that reality is an act of kindness. Some days healing looks like insight. Other days it looks like endurance. Both matter. The idea of a straight line suggests that there is a final point where healing is complete. Most people find that healing is ongoing, not because they are broken, but because life continues to change. Healing becomes less about fixing and more about adjusting, responding, maintaining balance. And within that ongoing process, there is room for stability, for joy, for meaning. Healing is not linear. It never was. Expecting it to be only adds confusion. When you allow it to move in its own shape, with patience and curiosity, it becomes easier to stay with the process. And staying with the process is what carries you forward, even when the path curves. Holding on when you're tired, not when you're strong. Most stories about resilience focus on strength, on pushing through, on standing tall in the face of difficulty. Strength has its place. It helps in moments that require action, clarity, and decisiveness. But there is another kind of resilience that rarely gets attention, the kind that shows up when strength is gone, when energy is low, when motivation has thinned, when you are not inspired, brave, or hopeful. This is the resilience of holding on while tired. There are days when you do not feel capable of doing more. You are not looking for progress. You are not planning the future. You are simply trying to make it through the next hour without unraveling. These days are not failures. They are part of being human. Holding on during these moments does not look impressive. It looks like staying, like not making things worse, like choosing not to give up, even if you do not know what comes next. It might look like getting out of bed and sitting quietly, or answering one message, or eating something simple, or deciding to sleep instead of forcing productivity. These actions are small, but when you are tired, small actions carry weight. Fatigue changes everything. Thoughts become heavier, problems feel larger, options narrow. The mind loses its ability to imagine relief. This does not mean you are weak. It means your system needs recovery. Yet many people judge themselves most harshly when they are most depleted. They compare their tired self to an idealized version of themselves at full capacity. The gap feels enormous. The self-criticism begins. Why can't I handle this? Why am I like this? This inner pressure drains what little energy remains. Holding on is often about refusing to add that extra burden. You may notice that when you are tired, decisions feel urgent and permanent. The mind searches for certainty. It wants an ending. This is when people are most tempted to make drastic conclusions. Pausing during these moments is an act of care. You do not need to solve your life while exhausted. You do not need clarity when your nervous system is overloaded. You need time. Time to rest. Time to let intensity settle. Time for perspective to return. Strength is useful when it is available. But endurance carries you through when it is not. Endurance is quieter, less dramatic. It does not announce itself. It simply keeps you here. There is dignity in that. Holding on does not require optimism. You do not need to believe that everything will be okay. You only need to believe that this moment is not the final word. That belief can be very small. It might sound like, I can wait, or I don't know yet, or I'll decide later. These are not inspiring statements. They are stabilizing ones. Tiredness also makes people forget how much they have already survived. Memory narrows under strain. Past resilience becomes invisible. Only the current weight remains. Reminding yourself that you have been tired before and it passed is not about minimizing your pain. It is about restoring proportion. You are allowed to be tired without needing to justify it. There is also a misconception that holding on means doing nothing. In reality, it often involves active restraint, choosing not to engage in thoughts or behaviors that would deepen distress. Sometimes holding on means avoiding conversations you are not ready for. Sometimes it means postponing decisions. Sometimes it means stepping away from stimulation. These choices protect energy. It is also important to recognize that tiredness can be emotional, not just physical. Emotional fatigue accumulates from constant vigilance, unresolved stress, and prolonged uncertainty. This kind of fatigue is harder to name. It does not always respond to sleep alone. It requires gentleness. Holding on emotionally may involve lowering expectations, letting tasks wait, allowing yourself to be less efficient, less responsive, less polished. This is not giving up. It is adjusting to capacity. People often wait to feel strong before allowing themselves compassion, but compassion is most effective when strength is absent. Offering yourself patience during fatigue builds trust. It teaches your system that it does not need to collapse to receive care. That trust reduces future burnout. There will be moments when holding on feels like the only thing you can do, when progress feels irrelevant, when survival feels like the goal. Those moments matter. They are not detours. They are part of the path. Over time, holding on creates space for recovery. Energy returns gradually. Perspective widens. The fog lifts. Strength reappears, not because you forced it, but because you did not abandon yourself when it was gone. That matters more than any dramatic comeback. You may not notice the exact moment when tiredness begins to ease. It often happens quietly. One day, you realize you laughed, or planned something, or felt curious again. These signs arrive gently. Holding on teaches you something important, that you can exist in uncertainty without immediate resolution, that you can endure discomfort without self-betrayal, that you can remain present even when you feel depleted. This kind of resilience does not rely on confidence. It relies on commitment to staying. Staying does not mean staying stuck. It means staying alive to possibility, even when you cannot see it yet. There is a deep humanity in holding on while tired. It is not glamorous. It is not heroic, but it is real. And often, it is the reason people eventually find their footing again. Strength will return when it can. Until then, holding on is enough. It has always been enough. Being proud of yourself in small, ordinary ways. Pride is often framed as something you earn through achievement. Big goals reached, hard work rewarded, visible success. This version of pride is public and measurable. It fits neatly into stories that celebrate milestones and breakthroughs. But most of life does not happen in milestones. Most of life happens in quiet decisions, repeated routines, and moments that leave no visible trace. And if pride only exists for the extraordinary, then the ordinary becomes invisible. That invisibility shapes how people see themselves. Being proud of yourself does not have to wait for dramatic change. It can exist alongside unfinished goals, imperfect habits, and ongoing struggles. In fact, it often needs to. Small pride is different from celebration. It is not loud. It does not need witnesses. It is a private recognition that says, "This mattered." You might feel it when you do something that costs you effort, even if no one notices. When you choose rest instead of pushing past exhaustion. When you speak honestly instead of staying silent. When you show up for something you wanted to avoid. These moments rarely feel triumphant. They often feel uncomfortable, but they reflect integrity. Integrity is living in alignment with what you know you need, even when it is inconvenient. That alignment deserves acknowledgement. Many people hesitate to feel proud of small things. They worry it means lowering standards or settling. They fear complacency. They fear self-indulgence. In reality, refusing to acknowledge effort creates its own problem. It teaches the mind that nothing is ever enough, that progress is invisible until it becomes undeniable, that rest and self-recognition are luxuries, not necessities. This mindset fuels chronic dissatisfaction. Small pride acts as a counterbalance. It keeps motivation grounded. It reminds you that effort counts even when outcomes are uncertain. You might notice that your inner critic is particularly active around ordinary actions. It dismisses them quickly. That's nothing. Anyone could do that. You should be doing more. This voice thrives on comparison. It measures worth by output and speed. It ignores context. Being proud of yourself in small ways interrupts that pattern. It does not argue with the critic. It simply refuses to let it have the final word. Pride in this sense is not about superiority. It is about recognition. Recognition of persistence, of honesty, of care. For example, getting through a difficult day without self-destructing is not insignificant. Setting a boundary that feels awkward is not trivial. Asking for help is not weakness. These actions reflect growth, even if they do not look impressive from the outside. Pride also helps reframe setbacks. When you are able to acknowledge effort independent of outcome, failure loses some of its sting. You can say, "This did not work, and I still showed up." That distinction matters. It allows learning without shame, reflection without self-attack, adjustment without discouragement. Over time, this builds resilience. Being proud in small ways also changes how you relate to time. Instead of waiting for future versions of yourself to deserve respect, you offer it now, as you are, in process. This does not mean abandoning goals. It means supporting yourself while you pursue them. You may notice that pride feels unfamiliar, almost awkward, especially if you were taught to downplay your own efforts, to stay humble, to let others decide your worth. Small pride is not arrogance. It is self-awareness. It is saying, "I see what I did there. I know what that cost me. No announcement required." There is also a healing aspect to this practice. Many people grew up in environments where effort was overlooked unless it resulted in success. Emotional labor went unrecognized. Persistence was expected, not praised. As adults, they continue that pattern internally. Being proud of yourself fills in that missing acknowledgement. It offers the validation that may not have been available before. This validation does not erase the past, it softens its impact. It is also cumulative. Each small moment of pride builds a more accurate self-image, one that includes struggle, effort, and follow-through. This self-image is steadier than one based solely on achievement. It does not collapse when things go wrong. You begin to trust yourself more. Trust grows when you recognize your own reliability, when you notice that you keep going, even quietly, that you adapt, that you learn. These qualities are easy to miss if you only look for dramatic change. Ordinary pride also changes how you experience rest. When rest is earned only through accomplishment, it is never fully relaxing. There is always something left undone, something more you should be doing. When pride acknowledges effort along the way, rest becomes permissible. It becomes part of the process rather than a reward at the end. This reduces burnout. There will be days when small pride feels out of reach, when everything feels heavy and unfinished. On those days, pride may simply be recognizing that you are still here. That recognition is not insignificant. You do not need to feel proud all the time. This is not another standard to meet. It is an option available when you choose to notice. Over time, you may find that your relationship with yourself becomes less adversarial, less focused on what is missing, more attentive to what is present. Being proud of yourself in small, ordinary ways is not about lowering expectations. It is about widening the lens. It allows you to see the full picture of your effort, not just the highlights. And in that fuller picture, there is more to respect than you may have realized. Making yourself a priority without apology. Many people are uncomfortable with the idea of making themselves a priority. The phrase alone can trigger guilt. It sounds selfish, demanding, out of step with what we are taught about being good, helpful, or responsible. For a long time, prioritizing yourself was framed as something you earn only after everyone else is taken care of. Your needs were placed at the end of the list. If there was time left, energy left, patience left, then you could attend to yourself. Often, there was nothing left. This pattern becomes so familiar that it feels normal. You adapt, you manage, you learn how to function on less rest, less attention, less space, and because you survive this way, it starts to feel acceptable, until it doesn't. There comes a point where constantly being last takes a toll. The signs are subtle at first: irritability, exhaustion, a sense of disconnection. Over time, they become harder to ignore. Making yourself a priority is not about abandoning others. It is about recognizing that you are part of the equation. You cannot remove yourself from your own life and expect things to work. Many people fear that prioritizing themselves will damage relationships, that saying no will hurt others, that taking time will disappoint someone, that setting boundaries will create conflict. Sometimes it does, but neglecting yourself creates conflict too, just a quieter kind. It shows up as resentment, burnout, emotional distance. Prioritizing yourself is often less disruptive than the alternatives. It begins with clarity, knowing what you need, rather than guessing based on what feels urgent around you. Needs are not indulgences, they are requirements for functioning. Rest is a need. Emotional safety is a need. Time to think is a need. Without them, everything else becomes harder. Making yourself a priority means acknowledging these needs without justifying them. The apology often comes automatically. I'm sorry, but I need some time. I'm sorry, I can't help right now. I'm sorry, I need to rest. These apologies are rarely questioned. They sound polite, but they send a message, especially to yourself. They imply that your needs are an inconvenience. Over time, this framing reinforces the belief that you are asking for too much. Removing the apology does not mean becoming rude or dismissive. It means speaking honestly without self-blame. It means saying, I need this, without attaching shame to the statement. That shift can feel uncomfortable, especially if you are used to being accommodating. Discomfort does not mean you are wrong. It means you are adjusting a pattern. Patterns resist change. Making yourself a priority also requires recognizing how often you ignore your own signals. Hunger, fatigue, overwhelm. These signals are easy to override in the name of productivity or obligation. Listening to them feels inefficient at first. Slowing down does, but ignoring them leads to larger disruptions later. Small acts of self-prioritization prevent larger breakdowns. You may notice that when you begin to prioritize yourself, others react. Some will respect it, some will question it, some may benefit from the version of you that is more present and less depleted. And some may push back. This is not necessarily because you are doing something wrong. It is because change alters dynamics. When someone is used to you being available at all times, your boundaries feel unfamiliar. You are not responsible for managing everyone's reaction. Prioritizing yourself is also about internal choices. How you speak to yourself, how you schedule your time, how you decide what matters. It means choosing rest without turning it into a reward, choosing care without waiting for permission. This can feel especially difficult if you were taught to measure your worth by usefulness. If being needed became part of your identity, letting go of that role takes time. Making yourself a priority does not mean you stop caring about others. It means you care in a way that is sustainable. Sustainable care is calmer, clearer, less resentful. You might notice that when you are well rested and emotionally supported, your capacity increases naturally. You give without feeling drained. You listen without impatience. You engage without forcing. This is not coincidence. It is what happens when your needs are not perpetually postponed. There is also a deeper layer to prioritizing yourself. It involves trusting your own experience, believing that if something feels too much, it probably is, believing that your limits are real even if others do not see them. This trust does not develop overnight. It grows through practice, through honoring small needs consistently. Over time, you learn that the world does not collapse when you choose yourself, that relationships adjust, that you remain connected, just more grounded. There will be moments when you question yourself, when guilt surfaces, when old habits tug at you. This is normal. Guilt often signals change, not wrongdoing. Making yourself a priority is not a one-time decision. It is an ongoing process of noticing when you disappear from your own life and gently returning. You may not always get it right. You may overextend sometimes. You may pull back too far at others. This is part of learning. What matters is that you are paying attention. Prioritizing yourself without apology is not about demanding special treatment. It is about granting yourself basic respect. You live with yourself every day. Your well-being shapes everything you touch. Treating yourself as an afterthought undermines that reality. When you choose to include yourself in your own care, life becomes more balanced. Not perfect, but more honest. And honesty is a strong foundation for any life you want to sustain. Checking the mental health meter. Gently. Most people are familiar with checking things that matter. Fuel levels, battery percentages, bank balances. These checks are routine. They are not dramatic. They are a way of staying oriented. Mental health rarely gets the same treatment. Instead of regular check-ins, it often gets addressed only when something goes wrong, when stress becomes unmanageable, when emotions overflow, when functioning starts to slip. By then, the system is already under strain. A gentler approach treats mental health as something that benefits from attention before crisis. A mental health meter is not a diagnostic tool. It is not a scorecard. It is simply a way of noticing how you are doing without judgment. Checking it does not require deep analysis. It requires honesty. You might ask yourself simple questions. How tense do I feel today? How rested am I? How reactive? How connected? These questions are not meant to be answered perfectly. They are meant to bring awareness. Awareness changes behavior without force. When you check your mental state gently, you are more likely to respond in proportion. A slight dip might call for rest. A deeper drop might call for support. Without awareness, everything feels urgent. With awareness, things become more manageable. One of the reasons people avoid checking in is fear of what they might find. They worry that acknowledging distress will make it worse, that naming exhaustion will open a door they cannot close. In practice, ignoring internal signals usually amplifies them. The body and mind escalate when they are not heard. Gentle attention does the opposite. It communicates safety. Checking the mental health meter is also about timing. Doing it during calm moments builds familiarity. It becomes routine rather than reactive. You might notice that some days your meter is low for no obvious reason. Hormones, sleep, and stress accumulate in ways that are not always visible. Not everything has a clear cause. That does not make the experience invalid. A gentle check-in accepts fluctuation without demanding explanation. It allows you to say, "Today is heavier," without turning it into a problem to solve. This reduces self-criticism. Another common habit is using productivity as a proxy for mental health. If you are getting things done, you assume you are fine. If you are not, you assume something is wrong. Productivity is an unreliable measure. People can be productive while overwhelmed. They can be unproductive while recovering. Mental health is not always reflected in output. A mental health meter focuses on internal state, not performance. This shift can feel unfamiliar. It requires listening rather than evaluating. It requires curiosity instead of control. You may notice resistance in the form of minimization. I'm fine. Others have it worse. It's not that bad. These thoughts often appear automatically. They are learned responses. They help you push through, but they also silence important information. Gentle checking does not argue with minimization. It simply returns to sensation. What am I actually feeling right now? The answer might be vague, tired, on edge, flat. Those are enough. You do not need a label to respond with care. Checking in gently also helps differentiate between temporary stress and deeper patterns. A few low days may reflect fatigue. A longer stretch may signal something that needs attention. Without regular check-ins, everything blends together. This practice also supports emotional regulation. When you notice early signs of overwhelm, you can intervene before intensity builds. This might mean slowing down, taking breaks, reducing stimulation. These adjustments are small, but they are effective. Mental health often deteriorates not because of one big thing, but because of many small things left unaddressed. A gentle meter helps catch those early. It is important to approach this practice without judgment. A low reading is not a failure. It is information. Information allows choice. Judgment shuts that down. You are not trying to maintain a constant high state. That is unrealistic. You are trying to stay connected to yourself across changes. There will be days when you check in and realize you have been ignoring yourself for a while. That realization may bring regret, or sadness, or frustration. These reactions are understandable. They do not require punishment. They require compassion. Reconnecting after disconnection is part of the process. You may also notice that your meter is influenced by external environments. Certain people, certain tasks, certain rhythms. Paying attention to these patterns can inform future choices. This is not about control. It is about alignment. Checking the mental health meter gently also creates space for gratitude that feels grounded. On days when you feel steady, noticing that steadiness reinforces it. It builds confidence in your ability to recognize and support your own well-being. Over time, this practice becomes quieter, less intentional, more integrated. You notice shifts automatically. You adjust naturally. This is not because you are hyper-focused on your mental health. It is because you are familiar with your inner landscape. Familiarity reduces fear. When difficult moments arise, they feel less threatening because you recognize them. You have context. You know they pass. That knowledge is stabilizing. A gentle check-in does not fix everything. It does not prevent all distress. It simply ensures that you are not a stranger to yourself, and that connection matters. Being attentive without being alarmed, curious without being critical, present without being overwhelmed. That is what it means to check the mental health meter gently. Not as a task, not as an obligation, just as a quiet habit of care that keeps you oriented in your own life. Self-care is not selfish, it's maintenance. Self-care has become a loaded term. It is often portrayed as indulgence, something extra, something you do only when time allows and responsibilities are handled. In many cases, it is packaged as a reward rather than a requirement. This framing creates confusion. When self-care is treated as optional, it becomes easy to postpone. There is always something more urgent, someone else's needs, one more task, one more responsibility. Self-care slips to the bottom of the list, quietly replaced by endurance. For a while, this works. You function, you manage, you keep going. But over time, the system begins to strain. Energy drops. Patience thins. Small things feel overwhelming. Neglect accumulates slowly, often unnoticed until it becomes unavoidable. This is where the misunderstanding lies. Self-care is not about indulgence. It is about maintenance. Maintenance is not optional. Every system requires it. Cars need fuel and oil. Homes need upkeep. Devices need charging. Ignoring maintenance does not make these systems stronger. It makes failure more likely. The same is true for people. When self-care is framed as maintenance, it loses its moral weight. It is no longer about deserving rest or earning care. It is about sustaining function over time. Maintenance is practical. It involves basic needs that are easy to overlook: sleep, nutrition, movement, quiet, emotional processing. These are not luxuries. They are foundational. Skipping them may feel efficient in the short term. In the long term, it is costly. Many people resist self-care because they associate it with selfishness. They worry that prioritizing their needs will take something away from others, that caring for themselves will make them less available, less generous, less useful. In reality, neglecting yourself eventually reduces what you can offer. Burnout does not make people more compassionate. Exhaustion does not improve patience. Resentment does not strengthen relationships. Maintenance supports generosity by making it sustainable. Another reason self-care feels uncomfortable is that it often requires slowing down. Slowing down creates space. Space allows awareness. Awareness brings you face to face with how you actually feel. That can be uncomfortable. It is easier to stay busy than to notice fatigue, easier to stay distracted than to acknowledge stress. Self-care interrupts that momentum. This interruption is not weakness. It is wisdom. Maintenance also looks different depending on the moment. Sometimes it is rest, sometimes it is structure, sometimes it is saying no, sometimes it is asking for help. There is no universal formula. What matters is responsiveness. Paying attention to what is needed now rather than following a fixed idea of what self-care should look like. This flexibility is often missing from popular narratives. Self-care is marketed as an aesthetic. Candles, baths, retreats. While these can be pleasant, they are not the core. Core self-care is often ordinary, unremarkable, quiet, going to bed earlier, eating regularly, stepping away from stimulation, taking a break before you are desperate for one. These actions rarely feel impressive. They feel responsible. Maintenance does not announce itself. It simply prevents breakdown. There is also an internal aspect to self-care that is less visible. How you speak to yourself, how you interpret mistakes, how you respond to stress. Harsh self-talk is a form of neglect. Constant pressure without recovery is a form of neglect. Ignoring emotional signals is a form of neglect. Maintenance includes gentler internal conditions. You may notice resistance when you try to care for yourself consistently. Thoughts like, I don't have time, or this can wait, or others need me more. These thoughts often reflect learned beliefs about worth, that your value lies in output, that rest must be justified, that care must be earned. Maintenance challenges these beliefs quietly. It does not argue. It simply acts. Over time, consistent self-care sends a different message, that you matter enough to be maintained, that your well-being is not conditional. This message reshapes your relationship with yourself. It also changes how you approach challenges. When you are maintained, setbacks feel more manageable. Stress does not escalate as quickly. Recovery happens faster. Maintenance builds resilience indirectly. Self-care also becomes more effective when it is preventative rather than reactive. Waiting until you are depleted makes care feel urgent and heavy. Caring for yourself earlier keeps things lighter. This does not mean constant monitoring. It means regular attention. You might think of maintenance as small adjustments made often. Drinking water before thirst becomes extreme, resting before exhaustion takes over, pausing before frustration spills out. These adjustments reduce the need for crisis management. It is also important to recognize that maintenance is not selfish because it does not exist in isolation. You are part of systems, families, workplaces, communities. Your state affects those systems. Maintaining yourself contributes to their stability. This perspective removes the moral tension. Self-care is not you versus others. It is you within a network. Neglect disrupts that network eventually. There may be periods when maintenance feels difficult to access. Times of crisis, loss, overwhelm. During these periods, self-care may shrink to the basics. That is still maintenance. Maintenance adapts to capacity. It does not demand perfection. You may also notice that caring for yourself brings up emotions. Guilt, sadness, anger. These reactions are not signs that self-care is wrong. They are signs that something has been neglected for a while. Responding with patience matters. Self-care is not a performance. It does not need to look a certain way. It does not need to be optimized. It simply needs to be consistent enough to keep you functioning. When you view self-care as maintenance, the pressure drops. You stop asking whether you deserve it. You stop waiting for permission. You maintain because maintenance is what keeps things working. And you are something worth keeping working. Not perfectly, not endlessly, just well enough to live your life with steadiness and care. That is not selfish, it is practical. Self-love is not loud, it's consistent. Self-love is often portrayed as confidence without doubt, as bold affirmations, as certainty that never wavers. It is shown as something visible and unmistakable, something you declare and display. For many people, this image feels distant, unrelatable, even alienating, because real self-love rarely announces itself. It does not arrive as a sudden realization that you are enough. It does not eliminate insecurity or erase self-doubt. It does not feel powerful every day. More often, it looks quiet, repetitive, ordinary. Self-love is not a feeling you summon. It is a pattern you build. Consistency matters more than intensity. What you do repeatedly shapes how you relate to yourself far more than what you say once during a moment of clarity. Loud self-love promises transformation. Consistent self-love delivers stability. Consistency shows up in small decisions. How you treat yourself when you are tired. How you respond when you make a mistake. How you speak to yourself when no one else is listening. These moments are easy to overlook, but they are where trust is formed. Trust is central to self-love. Without it, positive statements feel hollow. You can tell yourself kind things, but if your actions contradict them, the mind notices. If you say you care about yourself but routinely ignore your limits, your system learns a different lesson. Consistency aligns words and actions. Self-love does not require grand gestures. It requires follow-through. It means showing up for yourself in predictable ways. Eating when you are hungry, resting when you are exhausted, setting boundaries even when it feels awkward. These actions may not feel loving in the moment. They often feel inconvenient. Love is not always comfortable. There is also a misconception that self-love should feel good all the time. That if you truly love yourself, you would feel confident, calm, and at ease. In reality, self-love often involves choosing what supports you rather than what soothes you immediately. It may mean having a difficult conversation, or walking away from something familiar, or admitting you are not okay. These choices can feel uncomfortable, but they reflect care. Consistency also means staying when things are hard, not abandoning yourself during moments of disappointment or shame, not withdrawing support when you fall short. Many people practice conditional self-love. They are kind to themselves when they perform well and harsh when they do not. This pattern teaches instability. Love becomes something you earn and lose repeatedly. Consistent self-love removes those conditions. It does not disappear when you struggle. This does not mean excusing harmful behavior or avoiding accountability. It means holding yourself responsible without cruelty. Accountability and care are not opposites. In fact, consistent self-love supports growth more effectively than self-criticism. When you know you will not be attacked for being honest, you are more likely to reflect accurately. To adjust, to learn. Fear-based motivation is short-lived. Trust-based motivation lasts. You may notice that consistency feels boring compared to dramatic change. It lacks the emotional high of sudden insight. It lacks the satisfaction of a breakthrough moment. But boredom is often a sign of sustainability. Self-love that depends on intensity is fragile. It fades when energy dips. It disappears under stress. Consistency remains. It shows up on ordinary days, on neutral days, on days that feel neither good nor bad. These days make up most of life. How you treat yourself then matters. Self-love also becomes visible in how you manage your inner dialogue. Not by eliminating negative thoughts, but by responding to them predictably. When the same old criticisms arise, consistency means meeting them with the same calm response each time. Not escalating, not arguing endlessly, just returning to a grounded stance. This repetition gradually changes the tone of your inner world. The mind learns what to expect. You might notice that when you consistently treat yourself with care, your tolerance for mistreatment decreases. From others, from environments, from situations that drain you. This is not because you become rigid. It is because your baseline shifts. Consistency raises standards quietly. You begin to notice what feels misaligned, what costs too much, what you no longer want to normalize. This awareness is not dramatic. It unfolds over time. Self-love also includes forgiveness. Not as a one-time act, but as an ongoing practice. Forgiving yourself for repeating patterns, for learning slowly, for needing reminders. Forgiveness does not erase consequences. It reduces self-punishment. Consistent forgiveness prevents stagnation. There will be days when self-love feels out of reach, when the old voices are loud, when patience is thin. Consistency does not require perfection on those days. It requires return to basics, return to care, return to presence. You may not feel loving, you may feel neutral, or tired, or frustrated. That is okay. Self-love does not depend on how you feel. It depends on how you act. Over time, consistent care reshapes self-perception. You begin to see yourself as someone who shows up, someone who does not abandon themselves, someone reliable. That identity is powerful. It does not rely on confidence, it relies on evidence. Self-love becomes less about convincing yourself of worth and more about experiencing it through repeated care. This experience builds quietly. It does not announce arrival. One day, you may realize that you no longer speak to yourself the way you once did, that certain patterns have softened, that you recover faster. These are signs of consistency at work. Self-love that lasts is not loud. It does not demand attention. It does not perform. It is built in small, steady ways, through choices that align with care, through habits that protect well-being. And over time, that quiet consistency becomes something you can lean on, even on days when everything else feels uncertain. The world is better with you still in it. There are moments when staying feels heavier than leaving, when the effort of continuing outweighs the hope of change, when the future feels vague and the present feels exhausting. These moments often arrive quietly, without drama. They settle in slowly, disguised as fatigue, numbness, or a sense of being done. In those moments, it can be hard to remember why your presence matters. The world does not always offer clear feedback. It does not pause to acknowledge the ways you contribute simply by being here. It rarely reflects back the impact of your existence in ways that feel personal or immediate. But impact is not always visible. You affect the world in subtle ways, through tone, through timing, through presence, through choices that ripple outward without announcement. A conversation that shifts someone's day, a kindness that interrupts a difficult moment, a perspective that quietly alters how someone sees themselves. You may never know where these moments land. That does not make them insignificant. When you are tired or overwhelmed, your mind may narrow its focus. It may reduce your existence to productivity or usefulness. If you are not achieving, not fixing, not contributing in obvious ways, it may question your value. This is a limited view. Your worth is not measured solely by output. It is not contingent on constant contribution. It is inherent in your presence, your perspective, your lived experience. You bring something specific into the world that cannot be replicated. Not because you are extraordinary in some grand sense, but because you are singular. Your history, your sensitivities, your way of noticing things, all combine into something that does not exist anywhere else. Even on days when you feel invisible, that uniqueness remains. Staying does not require certainty. You do not need a clear plan or a defined purpose to justify your existence. You do not need to know how things will improve. Staying can simply mean allowing time to move. Time changes things in ways that are difficult to predict from within a low moment. Feelings that seem permanent soften, perspectives shift, opportunities appear quietly without warning. None of this is guaranteed. But none of it is possible if you are not here. The world is not better because it is perfect. It is better because it is varied, because it holds different ways of being, thinking, and feeling. You are part of that variety. Removing yourself does not solve the world's problems. It reduces its depth. There is also the reality that your presence matters to people in ways you may not fully grasp. Not always through grand gestures or dramatic bonds, but through consistency, familiarity, the simple fact that you exist in their world. Absence creates a silence that cannot be filled. You may think others would adjust, that life would continue. In some ways it would, but something specific would be missing. Something that only you provided, often without realizing it. This is not about obligation. It is about connection. Staying is not a promise to feel good. It is a willingness to remain open to change, even when change feels unlikely. There are days when staying looks passive, when all you do is endure. That endurance is not meaningless. It buys time. Time allows for rest, for recovery, for shifts that cannot be forced, for understanding that arrives later when you are ready for it. The pressure to find meaning immediately can be overwhelming. Meaning often emerges in hindsight, through accumulated experiences, through patterns that only become visible over time. You do not need to locate meaning now to justify staying. Staying itself is enough. There is also the matter of self-compassion. On difficult days, your mind may tell you that you are a burden, that you take up space unnecessarily, that you complicate things. These thoughts are symptoms of distress, not accurate assessments. Distress distorts perception. It shrinks perspective. It isolates. Treating these thoughts as signals rather than truths creates room for gentleness. You can acknowledge that something is hurting without agreeing with its conclusions. Staying means allowing yourself to be unfinished, uncertain, in process. It means recognizing that your story is not defined by its hardest chapters. Stories unfold over time. They change direction. They deepen. They surprise. You may not be able to imagine future versions of yourself who feel lighter, more connected, or more at ease. That does not mean they will not exist. It means your current state limits imagination. Imagination returns when conditions improve. The world benefits from people who stay, even when staying is hard, people who carry complexity, who understand struggle, who bring depth rather than ease alone. Your experiences shape how you relate to others. They give you insight that cannot be taught. They allow you to meet people where they are. This capacity matters. You do not have to transform pain into purpose to justify your presence. You do not have to make sense of everything. You only have to remain. Remaining creates the possibility of connection, growth, and moments of quiet contentment that are not dramatic but real. There may be days ahead that feel ordinary, days where nothing remarkable happens. These days are not empty. They are the fabric of life. And within that fabric, there are moments of warmth, of recognition, of simple being. You are allowed to want those moments. The world does not need you to be exceptional. It needs you to be here, still learning, still changing, still becoming. Your story is not finished. Even if it feels paused, even if it feels unclear, even if it feels heavy right now, the world is better with you still in it. Not because you're required to fix it, but because your presence adds something that cannot be replaced. Staying keeps that possibility alive. And sometimes, keeping possibility alive is the most meaningful thing you can do.